Park hadn't planned to dig a hole in his backyard that day. The cool autumn air made him shiver as he swept his metal detector across the ground, listening to its steady beep. He had bought it 3 months ago, right after signing his divorce papers and moving to this quiet house far from the city. "Just a hobby," he had told the salesman. "Something to keep my mind busy." Most days, the detector found only rusty nails or lost coins, sometimes an old can or piece of farm equipment. Jin-Ho kept everything in a shoebox labeled treasures, though nothing inside was worth more than a few dollars. Today was different. The detector screamed when he passed it over a patch of grass near his apple tree. The sound was higher, sharper than he had ever heard before. Jin-Ho marked the spot with a stick and went to get his shovel. The ground was soft from yesterday's rain, making the digging easier than usual. 1 foot down, he found nothing. 2 feet down, still nothing. By 4 feet, Jin-Ho had created a hole large enough that he could stand in it, the edges rising above his waist. "This is crazy," he muttered, pushing the shovel into the earth once more. Probably just a piece off. The shovel hit something with a dull clang. Not the sound of striking stone, but something metallic. Jin-Ho dropped to his knees, using his hands to brush away the dirt. What he uncovered made him sit back on his heels. A smooth, curved surface gleamed in the afternoon sun. It was metallic but unlike any metal Jin-Ho had ever seen. Not silver or steel or aluminum, but something that seemed to shift colors slightly as shadows passed over it. Jin-Ho worked faster now, clearing more dirt. The object was oval-shaped, about 7 feet long and 3 feet wide. "Like a large egg, or a coffin," Jin-Ho whispered, his voice strange in the quiet yard. But no coffin he had ever seen looked like this. The entire surface was covered in tiny symbols etched into the metal. They weren't letters or numbers, at least not in any language Jin-Ho recognized. They flowed in circular patterns, forming complex designs that seemed to move if he looked at them too long. Jin-Ho climbed out of the hole and ran to his shed, returning with more tools. He spent the next hour carefully digging around the object until it was completely exposed. It sat in a perfect depression in the earth, as if it had been placed there deliberately rather than buried. The sun was beginning to set when Jin-Ho finally sat back, exhausted. The pod, he had decided to call it a pod, was unlike anything he had ever seen. It must be worth a fortune. A scientific discovery, maybe. He should call someone. The university in the nearby city would want to know about this. But something held him back. A strange feeling in his chest, a curiosity that burned stronger than common sense. "What are you?" he asked the pod, not expecting an answer. He reached out and touched the smooth surface. It was warm, which surprised him. It should have been cold after being underground for who knows how long. His fingers traced one of the etched lines, following it to where it spiraled around what looked like a small indentation. As his finger passed over the indentation, a soft hum filled the air. Jin-Ho jumped back, nearly falling out of the hole. The hum grew louder, and then a section of the pod's surface changed. There was no other way to describe it. The solid metal simply became transparent, like a window appearing where there had been none before. Jin-Ho leaned forward, heart pounding in his chest. Through the clear section, he could see inside the pod. Someone was in there. Not something, someone. A woman, or at least a female form. She lay perfectly still, arms at her sides, eyes closed. But she wasn't human, not exactly. Her skin had a silvery sheen to it, reflecting the fading sunlight. Her features were delicate, almost too perfect, like a sculpture rather than a person. Her hair was white with hints of blue, spreading around her head like a halo. "Oh my God," Jin-Ho breathed, unable to look away. Jin-Ho. As if responding to his voice, the humming changed pitch. The pod vibrated slightly, and Jin-Ho watched as color seemed to flow into the figure inside. The silver skin took on a warmer tone, though still unlike any human complexion. Her chest began to rise and fall in a slow, steady rhythm. Jin-Ho pressed his hand against the transparent section, not knowing what else to do. The surface felt like glass now, though he knew it had been solid metal moments before. Suddenly, the woman's eyes opened. Jin-Ho fell backward with a shout. Those eyes, they were nothing like human eyes. Large and almond-shaped, with no white at all. Instead, they glowed a vibrant purple, the color shifting like light through a prism. Those strange eyes focused on Jin-Ho, blinking once, twice. The woman's head turned slightly, taking him in. There was intelligence in that gaze, awareness. She was looking at him, really seeing him. Jin-Ho couldn't move. Fear and wonder held him frozen as the humming from the pod grew louder. The transparent section suddenly vanished, returning to solid metal. Before Jin-Ho could react, a new seam appeared along the top of the pod, running its entire length. With a soft hiss, the pod opened. Steam or mist, Jin-Ho couldn't tell which, poured out, smelling faintly of something sweet and unfamiliar. The woman sat up slowly, movements graceful despite what must have been a long time in that confined space. She was dressed in a simple garment that seemed to be made of the same shifting material as the pod itself. Up close, Jin-Ho could see that her skin wasn't exactly silver, but had tiny patterns within it, like circuits or veins that occasionally flashed with inner light. Jin-Ho should have run. Any reasonable person would have, but he stayed where he was, kneeling in the dirt, watching as the woman, the alien, looked around his backyard with those incredible purple eyes. She turned back to him and tilted her head slightly. Her lips parted, and Jin-Ho prepared himself to hear sounds no human had ever heard before. Instead, she spoke in perfect, unaccented Korean. "Thank you for finding me," she said, her voice melodic and clear. "I have waited a very long time." Jin-Ho opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "Who are you?" he finally managed. The woman smiled, an expression so human it was startling on her alien face. "My people do not use names as you do, but you may call me Han. It means ocean and brightness in your language, yes. I find it suitable." "How do you know Korean?" Jin-Ho asked, his mind struggling to process what was happening. "I have been listening," Han said simply. "Through the earth, through the air. Your language was not difficult to learn." She looked up at the darkening sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. "We have much to discuss, Jin-Ho Park, and very little time." Jin-Ho stared at her. "How do you know my name?" Han pointed to a small pile of mail on the ground beside the hole, where Jin-Ho had tossed it when he started digging. "Your correspondence, but also," she touched her temple, "I can feel certain things. Your thoughts are loud." She stood up in one fluid motion and stepped out of the pod. Jin-Ho scrambled to his feet, suddenly aware of how strange this situation was. An alien had just emerged from a pod in his backyard, speaking his language and apparently reading his mind. "What are you going to do?" he asked, taking a small step backward. Han looked at him with those purple eyes. "First," she said, "I would like to see your world. It has changed much since my pod landed here. And then we must find the others." "Others?" Jin-Ho felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "There are more of you." Han nodded, her expression serious. "My pod was not the only one. And we were not sent here by accident, Jin-Ho Park. We were sent to save you." Jin-Ho stood frozen in his backyard, staring at the alien woman who had just climbed out of the pod. The night air felt suddenly colder as her words sank in. "I am called Han," she repeated when he didn't respond. "And you are Jin-Ho Park." "How do you know my name?" he managed to ask, his voice barely a whisper. She pointed to his mailbox, visible from the yard. "Your name is there. And here." She touched her temple with slender fingers. "I can sense some things." Jin-Ho took a step back. "What are you?" "My designation is Inji," she said, apparently changing her mind about her name. Her lips moved strangely around the Korean syllables, as if she was still getting used to speaking aloud. I have been in stasis for 73 of your years. Jin-Ho looked at the hole in his yard, then back at the woman standing before him. Her silvery skin caught the moonlight, making her glow softly in the darkness. Her eyes were still that impossible purple color, but they seemed kind, not threatening. You should come inside, he said finally, making a decision he wasn't sure was wise. It's getting cold. Eunji followed him into his small house. Jin-Ho watched as she examined everything with obvious curiosity. The light switches, the refrigerator, even the pattern on his couch cushions. She moved with strange grace, her steps so light she barely seemed to touch the floor. You live alone, she observed, looking at the single plate in the dish rack. Jin-Ho nodded. Since my divorce. I teach history at the local high school. He made tea with shaking hands while Eunji explored his living room. When he returned with 2 cups, she was examining a family photo. These others look like you, she said. Family units. My parents and sister, Jin-Ho confirmed, setting down the tea. They live in Seoul. Eunji sat on the couch, mimicking the way Jin-Ho sat in his armchair. She held the teacup carefully, watching how Jin-Ho sipped before doing the same. This is pleasant, she said after tasting the tea. We have similar drinks, though with different compounds. Jin-Ho couldn't hold back his questions any longer. Where are you from? Why are you here? Are there others like you coming? Eunji set down her cup. I am from a system you cannot see with your current technology. Your astronomers haven't discovered it yet. She paused. I was part of an advanced scout team studying Earth's civilizations when our craft malfunctioned. I was placed in the emergency pod and ejected. The pod was programmed to bury itself for protection. And the others in your team? I don't know, she said, and for the first time, Jin-Ho saw emotion cross her features, something like sadness. My communication device was damaged. I cannot contact them or my homeworld. Jin-Ho tried to process this information. An alien civilization had been studying Earth. They had technology advanced enough for interstellar travel, and now one of them was sitting on his couch, drinking green tea. Are you dangerous? He asked cautiously. Eunji looked surprised. No, we are observers, collectors of knowledge. We do not interfere unless invited. That night, Jin-Ho made up the spare bedroom for her. He couldn't sleep, lying awake and listening for any strange sounds from the guest room. Around dawn, he finally dozed off, only to be awakened by the smell of something burning. He rushed to the kitchen to find Eunji standing by the stove, staring in fascination at a smoking pan. I observed you cooking yesterday, she explained. The process is interesting, but more complex than it appears. Jin-Ho took the pan and put it in the sink, running water over the burnt remains of what might have been eggs. Maybe I should handle the cooking for now. Over breakfast, which Jin-Ho prepared, Eunji explained more about her mission. Your technology is primitive, but your cultures are fascinating, she told him, watching his television with intense focus. My people value knowledge above all else. In the days that followed, Jin-Ho was amazed at how quickly Eunji adapted. She absorbed information at an incredible rate, watching Korean television programs and reading books from Jin-Ho's shelves. Within a week, her speech patterns had changed to match local expressions and slang. You learned so fast, Jin-Ho remarked one evening as she helped him grade papers for his history class. She had memorized every student's handwriting after a single glance and could identify their work without looking at the names. It is a natural ability of my species, she explained. We evolved as information gatherers. Jin-Ho noticed other strange abilities too. One morning, Eunji cut her finger on a kitchen knife while helping prepare breakfast. The wound, which would have required stitches on a human, sealed itself within minutes. By evening, there wasn't even a scar. Does nothing hurt you? Jin-Ho asked, examining her healed finger with wonder. Many things can hurt us, Eunji replied. But we repair quickly. It is necessary for space travel and exploration of different environments. As weeks passed, Jin-ho found himself growing comfortable with Yunji's presence. He told neighbors she was a cousin from Seoul staying with him for a while. If they noticed her unusual appearance, they were too polite to mention it. Yunji had learned to use a special lotion that made her skin look more human, and she wore sunglasses to hide her purple eyes when they went out. Jin-ho took her to the school where he taught, showing her around after hours. She was fascinated by the simple technology: overhead projectors, computers, even the pencil sharpeners. "Your teaching methods are inefficient but effective," she observed. "The emotional connection between teacher and student enhances learning. We could learn from this approach." One evening, as they sat on Jin-ho's porch watching the sunset, he finally asked the question that had been on his mind since the beginning. "Why were you really sent here?" he asked. "It can't just be to study us." Yunji was quiet for a long moment, her purple eyes reflecting the orange sky. "To determine if Earth is ready to join the greater community of worlds," she replied simply. Jin-ho stared at her. "There's a community of aliens? Like a Space United Nations?" "That is a simplified explanation, but essentially correct," Yunji said. "Many civilizations across this galaxy have achieved faster than light travel, some for thousands of years. There are protocols for contact with developing worlds. And Earth is a developing world." Yunji nodded. "One with great potential, but also great risk. Your species is remarkably creative and adaptable, but also prone to violence and short-term thinking." Jin-ho thought about this. "So you're like, what? Testing us?" "Observing," Yunji corrected. "My team was meant to study human societies for 50 years, then report back. Based on that report, the council would decide whether to initiate formal contact. And now, your team is gone. Your ship is destroyed. What happens to the mission?" Yunji looked at Jin-ho, her expression unreadable. "Now, you are my only data point. My interactions with you will form the basis of my assessment." Jin-ho felt the weight of her words. Somehow, his reactions, his behavior, might determine whether humanity was deemed worthy of contact with advanced civilizations. "No pressure," he muttered. To his surprise, Yunji laughed, a sound he had never heard from her before. It was light and musical, like wind chimes. "You just made a joke," she said, sounding pleased. "Humor is highly valued among my people as well. It suggests higher cognitive functions and emotional intelligence." Jin-ho smiled despite himself. "So I passed that test." "It was not a test," Yunji insisted. "But yes, you did well." As darkness fell, they moved inside. Jin-ho made dinner while Yunji set the table, a routine they had established over the past month. It felt strangely normal now, sharing his home with a being from another world. "Tomorrow I need to check on my pod," Yunji said as they ate. "Some systems may still be functional. I might be able to send a short-range signal." Jin-ho nodded, but felt a strange tightness in his chest at the thought. If she contacted her people, would they come for her? Would she leave? "I'll help you," he said, pushing the thought away. "We can go in the morning before school." Hyunjae looked at him with those mysterious purple eyes. "You have been kind, Jin-ho Park. Not all humans would have helped a stranger like me." "Not all humans find aliens in their backyard," Jin-ho replied with a smile. Later that night, as Jin-ho lay in bed, he wondered what would happen when Yunji's people eventually came for her. Would Earth be welcomed into this greater community she spoke of? Or would her report suggest humans weren't ready? And why did the thought of her leaving make him feel so empty inside? Jin-ho woke to the sound of birds singing outside his window. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Then he remembered the alien living in his guest room and the strange turn his life had taken. He found Yunji in the kitchen, staring out the window with unusual intensity. "Is something wrong?" he asked, reaching for the coffee pot. "We should check on the pod today," she said without turning. I'm concerned about its energy signature. After breakfast, they walked to the backyard where the pod still lay partially buried. Jin-Ho had covered it with a tarp and piled garden tools around it to hide it from curious neighbors. Yun-ji knelt beside it and placed her palm on its surface. The metal responded to her touch, glowing faintly where her hand met it. "The containment field is weakening," she said with a frown. "It's releasing trace energy signatures." "Is that bad?" Jin-Ho asked. "It could be detected by your more advanced monitoring systems. Military, scientific research facilities." Jin-Ho felt a chill. "Can you shut it down?" "I'll try." Yun-ji spent the next hour working with the pod, her fingers moving across its surface in complex patterns. Finally, she stood up. "That should help, but it's not a permanent solution." 3 days later, Jin-Ho was collecting his mail when he noticed something unusual on the quiet rural road. 2 black SUVs were parked just beyond his property line. Their windows were tinted dark, reflecting the afternoon sun. As he watched, a man in a dark suit stepped out of one vehicle and appeared to take photos of his house with a small device. Jin-Ho walked back inside, trying to look casual despite his racing heart. "We have visitors," he told Eun-ji, who was reading a book on Korean history. "Government types, I think." Eun-ji set down the book, her purple eyes darkening with concern. "Let me see." She peered through the window curtains for only a moment before turning to Jin-Ho with a grim expression. "They've detected the pod's activation signal. My attempts to mask it weren't enough." Her voice was tight with urgency. "We must leave immediately." "Leave? Where would we go?" "Anywhere away from here. Do you have a place that wouldn't connect to you?" Jin-Ho thought quickly. "My friend Taiwan has a fishing cabin in the mountains. It's pretty remote. He might let us use it. Call him. Now. And pack only what you absolutely need." Jin-Ho was surprised by the command in her voice, so different from her usual gentle manner. He called Taiwan, making up a story about needing to get away for personal reasons. His friend was confused but agreed to let Jin-Ho use the cabin. "The key is under the blue flower pot," Taiwan said. "But what's going on? You sound strange." "I'll explain later," Jin-Ho promised, knowing he probably never could. They packed quickly. Jin-Ho threw clothes and food into a duffel bag, while Yun-ji gathered components from the pod, wrapping them in a blanket. They slipped out through the back door and into the small wooded area behind Jin-Ho's property. "My car is in the garage," Jin-Ho said as they crouched among the trees. "We can't use it. They'll be tracking vehicles leaving your property," Yun-ji replied. "We'll need to walk to the main road and find alternative transportation." Jin-Ho stared at her. "You've done this before." "My people prepare for many scenarios," was all she said. They hiked through the woods for nearly an hour before reaching a bus stop on the highway. The bus took them to the next town, where Jin-Ho withdrew cash from an ATM and rented a car using his school ID rather than his driver's license. "They'll still be able to track this," he said as they drove toward the mountains. "Yes, but it will take time. And time is what we need most now." Taiwan's cabin was little more than a one-room structure with basic amenities: a wood stove, a small bathroom, and a kitchenette. It sat beside a small lake, far from any neighbors. Jin-Ho found the key exactly where his friend had said it would be. Inside, Yun-ji immediately began setting up the components she'd taken from the pod, arranging them on the wooden table in a pattern that made no sense to Jin-Ho. "What is all that?" he asked. "Communication equipment. Defensive measures." She looked up at him, her expression more serious than he had ever seen it. "Jin-Ho, there's something I haven't told you." He sat down across from her. "I'm listening." "My biological makeup contains elements your scientists would consider impossible," she explained. "Compounds that don't exist naturally on Earth. Self-replicating cellular structures. If weaponized by your military, it could cause devastation." Jin-Ho tried to understand. "You mean they would want to study you? Experiment on you?" "Some would. Others would simply fear me and want me destroyed. She connected two objects that began to glow with soft blue light. My mission was peaceful. We never intended to interfere with Earth's development, but now I fear my presence may accelerate a dangerous path. That evening, they found an old television in the cabin. The reception was poor, but they managed to tune into a news channel. A government spokesman identified as Director Kim was giving a press conference. He was a tall man with a rigid posture and cold eyes. The National Security Agency is conducting a search for unauthorized foreign technology in the southern region, he announced. We have reason to believe potentially hazardous materials have entered our country. Anyone with information should come forward immediately. His gaze seemed to bore through the screen as he added, national security measures will be taken against any individuals who interfere with this investigation. Yoonji switched off the television. He will not stop, she whispered, and he cannot understand what he seeks to control. Jin-ho paced the small cabin. How did they find out? Who even knows to look for something like your pod? There are always those who watch the skies, Yoonji said. In every world we've studied, there are government agencies that monitor for signs of extraterrestrial activity. Most dismiss what they find, but some keep looking. Jin-ho stopped pacing. You've visited Earth before. Other planets too. Yes, we've been studying developing worlds for thousands of years. Earth is special interest to us. She hesitated. There are similarities between our species that suggest a common ancestor, far in the cosmic past. This new information stunned Jin-ho. You mean humans and your people are related? It's a theory, one I was sent to investigate further. Yoonji stood and looked out the window at the darkening forest. Now I fear I'd put you in danger. Me? I'm nobody. Just a high school history teacher. Yoonji turned to face him. You are the first human to make contact with my kind in 300 years. The last time didn't end well for either side. Jin-ho felt a chill run through him. What happened? Fear. Misunderstanding. Violence. She looked down at the alien components on the table. We retreated and decided to observe from a distance until humanity was ready. And now? Now we are both fugitives. She placed a hand on his arm. Her touch was warm, almost feverish. I'm sorry, Jin-ho. This was never supposed to happen. Later that night, as Jin-ho tried to sleep on the small couch while Yoonji took the bed, he heard her moving around. He opened his eyes to see her standing by the window, her silvery skin glowing faintly in the moonlight. She was looking up at the stars, one hand raised as if reaching for them. Can you see your home from here? He asked softly. No, she replied without turning. It's too far. Even your most powerful telescopes couldn't see it. Do you miss it? She was silent for a long moment. I miss knowing my purpose. Everything was clear before I met you. And now? Yoonji finally looked at him, her purple eyes reflecting the starlight. Now I question whether I can complete my mission as intended, whether I should. Jin-ho sat up. What do you mean? My report was meant to be objective, clinical, but you have shown me kindness, friendship, things I didn't expect to find here. She looked back at the stars. It changes how I see your world. Outside, an owl hooted in the darkness. The sound seemed to break the moment, reminding them both of their precarious situation. We should try to rest, Yoonji said. Tomorrow we need to make contact with my people, if we can. Jin-ho nodded, though his mind was racing with questions. As he settled back on the couch, one thought kept returning. If Yoonji managed to contact her people, would they come to rescue her? And if they did, what would happen to Earth, and to him? The morning sun filtered through the cabin windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Jin-ho watched as Yoonji examined the components she had salvaged from her pod. Her silver fingers moved with precision, connecting wires and adjusting tiny mechanisms that glowed with soft blue light. It's not enough, she finally said, looking up at him. We need more components from my pod to signal my people. Without a proper transmitter, any message I send will be too weak to reach beyond your solar system. Jin Ho ran his hands through his hair in frustration. We can't go back to my house. Those men in black suits are probably watching it. Then we must find another way. Yunji's purple eyes seemed to glow brighter as she thought. Is there someone else who might help us? Someone you trust? Jin Ho considered this. Maybe Ta Wan. It's his cabin, after all. And he's good with electronics. He fixes computers for extra money. Call him, Yunji urged. But be careful what you say. Your communication devices are easily monitored. Jin Ho used the cabin's old landline phone to call his friend, asking him to come to the cabin for a fishing trip. He tried to sound casual, but Ta Wan knew him too well. You hate fishing, Ta Wan said suspiciously. What's really going on, Jin Ho? I can't explain over the phone. Please, just come, and don't tell anyone where you're going. There was a long pause. I'll be there this afternoon, Ta Wan finally agreed. While they waited, Jin Ho and Yunji prepared for his arrival. They decided to tell him the truth. They had no choice if they wanted his help. Will he believe us? Yunji asked. I don't know, Jin Ho admitted. I probably wouldn't have believed it myself if I hadn't dug you up with my own hands. Ta Wan arrived just after lunch, his old truck bouncing up the dirt road to the cabin. He was a stocky man with kind eyes and a perpetual smile that faded when he saw Jin Ho's serious expression. You look terrible, Ta Wan said as he stepped inside. What's going on? Then he noticed Yunji, who had removed the special lotion that made her skin look human. In the cabin's dim light, her silver skin and purple eyes were impossible to miss. Ta Wan froze. What? Who is that? This is Yunji, Jin Ho said simply. She's not from Earth. To his credit, Ta Wan didn't run. After his initial shock, he listened as they explained everything. The pod, the government agents, their need to contact Yunji's people. This is crazy, Ta Wan said when they finished. But I believe you. No human could look like that. He gestured at Yunji, who tilted her head in acknowledgement. Will you help us? Jin Ho asked. Ta Wan thought for a moment. I know someone who might be useful. Hey Newell, that smart kid who graduated from your class 2 years ago. She works at the observatory on Mount Surak now. If anyone can help build some kind of space transmitter, it's her. Jin Ho nodded. Can you contact her? Better than that. I'll bring her here. Ta Wan stood up. But first, I need to get some supplies from town. And my sister should come too. Your sister? Jin Ho asked, surprised. Mei Ray is a biochemist at the university. She's been studying strange energy patterns in this region for years. Always said there was something unusual here. Ta Wan smiled. Guess she was right. After Ta Wan left, Jin Ho turned to Yunji. Do you think we can trust them all? We have little choice, she replied. And sometimes trust is the only path forward. The next day, their small alliance grew. Ta Wan returned with his sister Mei Ray, a serious woman with quick eyes that widened at the sight of Yunji. He Newell, Jin Ho's former student, came separately. She was barely 20, with short hair and nervous hands that never stopped moving. Professor Park, she greeted Jin Ho. Ta Wan said you needed help with some kind of communication device. Then she saw Yunji, and her scientific curiosity immediately took over. Incredible. Are you really extraterrestrial? What's the atmospheric composition of your home planet? How does your biology process oxygen? Mei Ray was more interested in the components from the pod. These energy signatures match patterns I've been recording for years, she said, examining the glowing pieces. I always knew something was out there. Together, they began to formulate a plan. He Newell had access to the observatory's radio equipment. Mei Ray knew the surrounding mountains better than anyone, and Ta Wan brought practical skills that would help them build whatever they needed. As they worked, Yunji shared more about her people and their history with Earth. The ancient carvings in your mountains, she told them as they studied local maps. They aren't just art. They're records of my ancestors' previous visits. Your people and mine share more than you realize. You mean those symbols at Yongdam Cave? Mireille asked, surprised. Archaeologists think they're just primitive drawings of the stars. They are star maps, Yunji confirmed, but not seen from Earth. They show the view from my homeworld. Jinho was amazed. How long have your people been visiting Earth? Thousands of your years, Yunji said. We watched your civilizations rise and fall. We helped, sometimes, in small ways. The legends, Hainul whispered. Every culture has stories about beings from the stars who gave knowledge to humans. Yunji nodded. Not all myths are just stories. For 3 days, they worked to build a transmitter using parts from the pod combined with equipment Hainul borrowed from the observatory. They set it up on the cabin's roof, pointing it toward a specific spot in the night sky that Yunji identified. This should work, Hainul said, making final adjustments. If her people are listening. That night, as they prepared to activate the transmitter, Jinho noticed headlights on the distant road. Then more appeared. Black shapes moving through the trees. They found us, he said, his heart sinking. Yunji looked out the window. Government forces, many of them. How? Ta-Wan demanded. We were so careful. The energy signature from our work, Mireille realized. It must have spiked when we tested the transmitter. Jinho watched as black SUVs surrounded the cabin. Men in tactical gear took positions among the trees. He recognized Director Kim stepping out of the lead vehicle, his cold eyes scanning the cabin. What do we do? Hainul asked, her voice trembling. Yunji stood in the center of the room, suddenly looking more alien than she ever had before. Her silver skin seemed to pulse with inner light. I will speak to them, she said calmly. They'll capture you, Jinho protested. Or worse. No, Yunji said with quiet confidence. They will not. Before anyone could stop her, she walked to the door and stepped outside. Jinho and the others crowded at the windows, watching in horror as she stood on the porch, facing dozens of armed agents. Director Kim's voice boomed through a megaphone. Surrender the alien technology immediately. This is a matter of national security. The agents raised their weapons. Tranquilizer guns, Jinho realized. They wanted Yunji alive. But she simply raised her hand. A strange humming filled the air, and a shimmering dome of energy expanded from her palm, growing until it encompassed the entire cabin and the small yard around it. The first volley of tranquilizer darts hit the dome and fell harmlessly to the ground. We do not bring weapons, she announced, her voice somehow carrying to every corner of the clearing. We bring knowledge. Director Kim stepped forward, his face twisted with anger. Stand down and surrender. You are in violation of. He was interrupted by a high-pitched tone that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Jinho and the others rushed outside to join Yunji under the protection of the dome. What's happening? Jinho asked. Yunji looked up at the night sky, her expression one of wonder. They heard us, sooner than I expected. Around the world, strange things were beginning to happen. In museums and private collections, artifacts that had puzzled archaeologists for centuries suddenly activated. Ancient stone tablets in Peru, bronze discs in China, clay figures in Mexico, all began to emit the same signal, converging on the energy dome where Yunji stood. Inside the National Museum in Seoul, a small jade figurine that had been dated to 3000 BC began to glow with blue light. The security cameras recorded it rising into the air, hovering for 3 seconds, then settling back into its display case. At the cabin, Director Kim and his men watched in confusion as the dome around Yunji and her friends grew brighter. The energy signature was off the charts, scrambling their equipment and causing their vehicles to shut down. What have you done? Director Kim demanded, his confidence faltering. I have simply called home, Yunji replied. And they have answered. Jin-Ho stood beside her, feeling the energy pulsing through the dome. It didn't hurt. Instead, it felt warm and somehow familiar, like a memory he couldn't quite place. "What happens now?" he asked Eunji quietly. She turned to him, her purple eyes reflecting the stars above. "Now we wait. My people will come. And then Earth must choose," she said, "to join us in knowledge and peace, or to continue alone." Director Kim was shouting orders, trying to regain control of the situation, but his men were backing away from the dome, their weapons lowered. Some were pointing at the sky, where lights had begun to appear, not stars, but something moving with purpose. Jin-Ho looked up and understood that nothing would ever be the same again. Jin-Ho stood at the window of the cabin, watching as the lights in the sky grew larger. The energy dome Eunji had created still protected them from Director Kim and his agents, who had retreated to a safe distance. The government men spoke urgently into radios and phones, their faces pale in the glow of the dome. "What are those lights?" Ta-One asked, pointing at the sky. "Scout ships," Eunji replied. Her silver skin seemed to pulse with excitement. "My distress signal reached a nearby observation post. They've sent an advance team." Hamul, the young astronomer, stared upward with her mouth open. "This is impossible. Our radar systems would have detected them approaching." "Your technology cannot detect our ships unless we wish to be seen," Eunji explained. "Now we wish to be seen." The lights descended slowly, resolving into 3 small craft that hovered above the clearing. They made no sound, not even the whoosh of air that should accompany objects moving through the atmosphere. Each was about the size of a car, shaped like smooth teardrops that glinted with the same strange metal as Eunji's pod. Director Kim shouted orders to his men, some of whom raised weapons despite their obvious fear. "Tell them to stop," Eunji said urgently to Jin-Ho. "If they fire, the scout ships will activate defense protocols." Jin-Ho stepped to the edge of the dome. "Director Kim, don't shoot. They mean no harm." The government official hesitated, then raised his hand, signaling his men to lower their weapons. He approached the energy dome cautiously. "What is happening here?" he demanded, trying to maintain authority even as historic events unfolded around him. "First contact," Jin-Ho said simply. "Real first contact." One of the scout ships descended to the ground just outside the energy dome. Its surface rippled, and an opening appeared. A figure emerged, humanoid, like Eunji, but taller and clearly male. His skin had the same silvery quality, though his was marked with intricate patterns that seemed to indicate rank or status. Eunji stepped forward, lowering the energy dome. Jin-Ho tensed, expecting Director Kim's men to rush forward, but they remained frozen in place, weapons at their sides. The alien visitor spoke in a language Jin-Ho didn't understand, musical and complex. Eunji responded in the same tongue, occasionally gesturing toward Jin-Ho and the others. Finally, the visitor turned to Director Kim. "I am Commander Subin," he said in perfect Korean. "Your government has been contacted through proper channels. This operation is now under international jurisdiction." As if to confirm his words, phones began ringing among the government agents. Director Kim answered his, and Jin-Ho watched the man's face change as he received new orders. "Stand down." Director Kim finally ordered his men. "Full stand down." He looked at Eunji with a mixture of fear and awe. "This isn't over," he said quietly before retreating to his vehicle. The next 3 days passed in a blur. Jin-Ho and his friends were taken aboard the main ship, where they met more of Eunji's people. Medical scans confirmed they were unharmed by their exposure to alien technology. Meanwhile, around the world, something extraordinary was happening. Similar ships appeared silently over major cities: Seoul, New York, Moscow, Beijing, London, Cairo. They made no aggressive moves, simply hovering in place, visible to millions. Unlike the invasion scenarios depicted in countless films, they made no demands or threats, only a request to address the United Nations. World leaders scrambled to organize an emergency session. On the third day, Jin Ho found himself in an impossible situation, standing in the Great Hall of the United Nations in New York, beside Yunji. She wore formal attire from her world, a flowing garment that seemed to be made of liquid metal, shifting colors as she moved. "Are you nervous?" she asked him as they waited to be introduced. Terrified, Jin Ho admitted, "I'm just a history teacher. I don't belong here." "You were the first to show kindness to a stranger from the stars," Yunji said. "There is no one better suited to stand with me today." The Secretary General of the UN approached the podium. "Distinguished delegates, today marks the most significant moment in human history. We are honored to welcome representatives from a civilization beyond our world." Yunji stepped forward, Jin Ho at her side. Cameras flashed. Billions of people watched on screens around the world. "People of Earth," Yunji began, her voice clear and strong. "I come before you not as a conqueror or a savior, but as a neighbor in the vast cosmos we share." She introduced Ambassador Da Hyun, her superior officer who had arrived with the main delegation. The ambassador was an imposing figure, taller than any human, with silver skin that bore elaborate markings denoting his high rank. The ambassador's gentle voice carried to the billions watching worldwide. "Humanity stands at a crossroads," he announced. "We offer partnership, not subjugation. Knowledge, not control." He explained that Earth was one of many developing worlds their civilization had observed over millennia. Now, due to unexpected circumstances, Yunji's emergency landing and Jin Ho's discovery of her pod, formal contact had been accelerated. "We would have preferred a more gradual approach," Da Hyun said, "but sometimes the universe has its own timetable." In the days that followed, protocols were established for knowledge exchange. A neutral site in Switzerland was designated as the main contact point. Scientists, doctors, and engineers from around the world were invited to participate. Jin Ho expected to return to his quiet life, his role in history complete. But Ambassador Da Hyun had other ideas. "We need someone who understands both our worlds," he told Jin Ho. "Someone humans trust and who has shown compassion toward our kind." And so Jin Ho became Earth's first liaison to what humans came to call the galactic community. His simple home was replaced by an office at the new Global Contact Center. His days of teaching history were replaced by helping make it. The changes came faster than anyone could have predicted. Within months, treatments were developed for diseases long considered incurable. Cancer, Alzheimer's, and many genetic disorders became manageable conditions rather than death sentences. Clean energy solutions replaced fossil fuels within a year. The designs were simple enough that even developing nations could implement them, ending energy poverty and dramatically reducing pollution. 6 months after first contact, Jin Ho sat in a cafe in Seoul with Yunji, watching people pass by on the street. Many glanced up occasionally at the elegant alien ship that now permanently hovered above the city, a symbol of the new era. "They're adapting well," Yunji observed. "Humans are remarkably flexible." "We've had lots of practice changing," Jin Ho replied, sipping his coffee, though usually not this quickly. A child walked by, pointing excitedly at Yunji. Instead of fear or suspicion, the faces Jin Ho saw showed curiosity and wonder. The world was changing, and for the better. "There are still problems," Jin Ho said. "Some religious groups see your people as a threat to their beliefs. Some governments worry about losing power. And there are those who think we're moving too fast." "Change is never easy," Yunji agreed. "But the path is set now. There's no going back to the isolation of before." As Earth's first liaison to the galactic community, Jin Ho often reflected on how a simple metal detector had changed the course of human history. How different things might have been if he had chosen to dig somewhere else in his yard that day, or if he had never bought the metal detector at all. In quiet moments with Yunji, now the permanent ambassador to Earth, He would ask if she had somehow planned to land in his backyard all those decades ago. She would smile mysteriously and say, "The universe has patterns we're only beginning to understand." 5 years after first contact, Jin-Ho stood on the observation deck of the first human-alien joint venture, a space station in Earth orbit that would serve as a training center for humans preparing to venture beyond their solar system. Beside him stood Eunji, watching as the blue curve of Earth passed below them. Her hand rested lightly on his, a gesture that had once seemed alien, but now felt entirely natural. "Do you ever regret it?" Jin-Ho asked. "Getting stranded here, missing 73 years in that pod?" Eunji turned to look at him, her purple eyes reflecting the starlight. "If I hadn't crashed, if you hadn't found me, our worlds might have remained separate for centuries more. So many would have suffered needlessly without the knowledge we shared." She looked back toward Earth. "Besides, I found something I never expected to find so far from home." "What's that?" Jin-Ho asked. "Connection," she replied simply. "The thing that truly elevates any species, anywhere in the cosmos." A group of human astronauts entered the observation deck, nodding respectfully to Eunji and Jin-Ho before taking their places at the viewing window. They were the first class of Earth's new interstellar academy, preparing for humanity's first mission beyond the solar system. Jin-Ho watched them, these pioneers about to take humanity's next great leap. Among them were faces from every nation, every background. Director Kim's son was even among them, having rejected his father's fear in favor of embracing the future. It all started with a beep from a metal detector, Jin-Ho mused. Strange how small moments can change everything. Eunji smiled. Perhaps not so strange. Perhaps it was always meant to be. As the station rotated, the sun came into view, its light spilling across the observation deck. Earth continued its ancient path around it. But now its people looked beyond, to the stars and the countless worlds circling them. Worlds where they would be welcomed not as conquerors or strangers, but as the newest members of a community older than human civilization itself. And it had all begun in Jin-Ho's backyard, with the simple curiosity that drives all intelligent life to look beneath the surface and discover what lies hidden in the ground beneath our feet and the stars above our heads.